Hey guys, welcome back. In this series, I'm going to build a simple website for a fictional coffee shop using Node.js and Express, of course, and deployed on Turbo, naturally. The coffee shop won't be real, but the project itself will be pretty full-featured, so that you can use it for a real project or a real shop if you want. Maybe you're building a site for a friend or for your own business. This project should be good enough to handle that. The only thing it won't include is an actual checkouts flow, so that you won't be able to process payments at the end of this tutorial, but I will create another tutorial just for that because that gets pretty involved. Um, we will include a content management system, or a CMS for short, where the admin of the website can add new menu items perhaps. So for example, if you want to introduce a new flavor of coffee, or perhaps you want to start selling pastries or food or something like that, the CMS will be good for that. Just to make sure you're the right person for this tutorial, or this tutorial is right for you, this is a beginner Node.js and Express tutorial, but it's not a beginner programming tutorial. So if you've never programmed before, then this is a bit too soon for that. You should check out one of my more beginner tutorials on the website, specifically Intro to Node.js and Express, and that'll give you a good foundation for a lot of the project-based tutorials we do on this site. You're going to need Node.js, obviously, and an account on Turbo so that you can deploy. These things are all free, and that should be good enough to go. So let's go ahead and get started. So first thing you want to do is make sure you have everything you need to run the project. So like I was saying earlier, make sure you have Node.js installed. I like to use the LTS, but some people like to download the current, really up to you. But just make sure you have a Node runtime. And then again, make sure you have an account on Turbo. This is the website. You can head over here and scroll to the bottom to sign up for free. This is a free site, so you don't have to worry about payment. There are paid features you can sign up for later on, but you can continue using the site for free for as long as you want. So once you have all that ready to go, go ahead and open up your terminal. I'm just going to move some things around. I'm going to move this over to there. Okay, so open up your terminal and then cd to the desktop, or wherever you do your programming work. I'm just using my desktop, and type in the following: node-v, to make sure you have an up-to-date version of Node. So I'm running 12.18.3. Also do an npm-v as well, just to make sure you have an npm properly installed. The Node package manager for installing packages. Once you've signed up for Turbo, you will need the Turbo CLI, or the command line interface, which is really a tool that helps you deploy projects to the Turbo hosting environment. So without that, you cannot deploy. So the way you install the Turbo CLI is you do sudo npm install -g turbo-cli. Now if you're running on a Windows machine, I'm pretty sure you don't need the sudo. I'm using a Mac. Mac and Linux, I'm pretty sure you do need the sudo. So make sure you understand the difference. If you're using sudo here, it's going to ask you for your system password. This is not your Turbo password, this is your system password. So just type that in, and then it will install the Turbo package globally onto your local environment, which is what we want. So once that's done, check the Turbo version by doing Turbo version, like that. And I'm running, I just downloaded 0.39.3. If you have an older version, like 0.38 or something like that, you want to run this command again. It means you have an outdated version. If you're watching this video later on and your version is higher than this, perhaps 0.40, it's fine. You should be good to go. So this is everything we need to basically do the entire project. Let's go ahead and let's go and get started. So first thing we want to do is scaffold our project. So we're going to use the Turbo CLI scaffolding engine for that, which gives us a very bare bones Node and Express project out of the box with a few basic configuration options set. So for example, it uses the mustache templating engine. It sets the static directory and things like that. But for the most part, it's a very bare bones Node Express project. Let's go ahead and set that up. So the way you do that is Turbo, new, and we're going to call this coffee shop. And here is where it creates the the scaffold. It generates the project. Don't worry about these next steps. We'll just do these together. So cd into the project that we just created. And let's open this up in our text editor. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, so you're free to use whatever you want, but I'm a big fan of VS Code. And here is the project that is scaffolded for us by the Turbo CLI. Like I said, it's a very bare bones Node Express project, so it has all the minimal pieces of you would expect to see in a Node project. So we have our package.json, which is where we declare our running scripts and our dependencies. App.js, where we import the routes and set the paths and things like that, and apply middleware, all that good stuff. Our views directory for our templates, route, public, folder for our static assets, so forth and so on. Let's go ahead and run the npm install so that we can install our dependencies, and this usually takes about a minute or so. So while that's going, let's head over to the app.js just to make sure we understand how the project is currently configured. So we have our basic Express imports up here, some basic configuration here. You can see how the views directory is set, the static directory is set for public. This is some middleware for actually doing the configuration options. This basically gives us all the basic configuration. You can remove this if you want, if you have your own preferences, like maybe you want to use a different templating engine, but then you'd have to go and set all that up. So here's where all the meat and bones is. This is where we import our route files and set the paths for these routes. We're going to remove all this though, and excuse me, use our own routing instead. So, but before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at what the project gives us out of the box. So the npm install is done now, so we installed our dependencies, and you can see those over here in the node modules. So now all we need to do is run the project locally, so we can do npm run serve. And if you look at the package.json, you'll see that I'm using this command right here on line 8, which gives us the dev server. So we can run npm run serve, and it's going to run the Turbo dev server on localhost 3000. So if we open this up in our browser, we should see the scaffolded website, which is this right here. This is just a very basic intro template. So that means everything worked. So let's go ahead and turn this off, Control C. And let's go ahead and send this up onto the server just to make sure everything works properly on the server as well. So over in your, actually before I do that, what you need to do is in your Turbo CLI, you want to do turbo login, and then log into the account you created on Turbo this time. So you want to use your Turbo email and password. Oops, wrong password. Okay, great. And then once you've done that, head over to your Turbo account where you signed up over here and bounce to your account page. And then you should see this on your account page where you can set your name, your username, your bio, stuff like that. I'm going to create a new site here called Coffee Shop. And really what this is doing is creating some server space where you can deploy your project. So by doing this, I've basically created some space on the server where I can go ahead and deploy on the Turbo hosting environment. So we're going to do that real quick just to make sure everything works on local and on the remote. So we're going to need the site ID and the API key in a moment. So we do turbo connect over here, and what this command does is it connects our local source code to the remote environment we want to use, which is going to be the site we just created over here. So we need to grab the site ID and then enter the API key. That's this guy over here. And then you should see this message meaning that it worked. So we can just do turbo deploy, that's this command right here. And this will throw the source code from our local environment to our remote hosting environment. And that way we can quickly make sure that everything is properly working and we're good to go both locally and on the remote, so that we can be confident that what we develop on our computer is what we will see on the server. So when this is done, we can go ahead and check the server real quick, and that'll be this URL right here. And this is our staging URL, so we can just copy and paste this into another tab in the browser. And now we see the same thing here as we saw on localhost. So it's the same site, except this time it's running on the staging server, which means everything works the same on the remote as on staging. As on local, which means we are good to go. So let's go ahead and actually get started. So now the next thing we need is the actual template we're going to use to add our UI, to set the UI, the visual components of our project. So we're going to use a default template called Cucina right here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can download this in the YouTube description. If you're watching this on the actual Turbo site, you can download this on the tutorial page where you're watching this from, and it'll be exactly this zip file. So once you download this zip file, go ahead and unzip it, of course, and then you will see this folder right here. And this is basically just a collection of HTML files and CSS and JavaScript and images and things like that, which gives you basically a website interface right out of the box. So we have our index HTML right here, and this is going to be the template we use to establish our page or our website visual configuration. So let's go ahead and start throwing this guy into our site, and we can then make sure that our site looks nice like this one. So we have our coffee shop source code right here. And if I head over to my actual code right here, an important thing to understand is that the public directory over here is where the CSS, the static assets are determined. So we have our CSS, images, JavaScript, all that stuff. So we don't want to use these, the scaffold out of the box. We want to use the stuff from the Cucina project. So if we open up the Cucina template, you'll see we have CSS, font, images, basically all the static assets are over here, especially if you group these by folder. So really all we need to do is move these directories over into the public directory over here. And we will then be importing the static assets. So we just basically moved all of these files, the static folders, into the public directory of our project. So now we have all the CSS, images, JavaScripts, etc. Now we need the actual HTML, which comprises the template, which I closed. So I'll open that up again later. So that's this page right here, the index HTML. So let's go ahead and set that up. So what we need to do is inside of our coffee shop project, head over to the app.js. Let's get rid of these routes because these are the ones that come with the scaffold. We don't want to use any of these. We want to use our own routes. Actually, I'm just going to comment these out. So we can do const, and I'm going to create a new route called main, and that will be imported from the routes folder, and it will be called main.js, the main.js route. So we have a routes folder right here with two routes, API and index. That's these two guys right here, but we want to create our own called main.js. So, and then we want to use that instead of the API or the index. So here we're telling the app to import the main.js route and then use that for the home page request. That's this line right here, line 27, the main path. So this won't work yet because we didn't create the routes. Let's go ahead and start doing that. So inside the route file, the route folder, we want to create a main.js, and inside here we want to set up the actual route. So let's go ahead and import Express. This is going to be an Express router, of course, so let's go ahead and set that up. So that's going to be called router, and it's Express. It's a function called router. Always export it right here. because it's very easy to forget that. And then right now what we want to do is set up a get handler for the home page, which takes a request, response, and a next argument. So again, I might be moving a little fast here. If you're completely new to Node and Express, I'm probably moving a bit quickly. So if this is completely foreign to you right now, you check out one of my beginner Node.js and Express tutorials, the intro to Node.js and Express specifically, where I really break down the pieces that we're going through right here. So right now what I'm doing first is I'm just going to send back a string request. This is the main route. And then now we have our route set up with sending back a string request. And then now we can actually test this. So we can go back here to the terminal and do Npm Run Serve. And we should now see the string output from the main route we just set up. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's confirm that. So this is the main route. There we go. So turn that guy off. Now let's head over to, this is now, we can go ahead and chuck this. And index and API, I'm just going to delete these because they'll just get in the way. Okay, so we don't want to show just this raw string. We want to show the actual home page, right? So that's the actual HTML template. So that's going to be in the views directory. The templates are stored in the views directory. And again, that's set in the config over here, views. So if we had another directory instead, we can say templates. If we want to create a new folder for templates and store all the templates in there, but we're not going to do that. So inside here, we want to create a new template for the home page. So I'm going to call it exactly that. So home.mustache. And I'm going to just, well, rather than copy and paste that, I'm going to open up the Cucina. And we're going to use the index.html here. Let's open that up in our code editor. Let's copy all of this and paste it into our home.mustache file. So we just copied and pasted from the Cucina template theme, I should say, the theme, and pasted it over into our project, specifically the home.mustache template. So once that's done, we can now go back to our main.js route and tell it to render the home template, which is this mustache file right here. So let's go ahead and try that now on localhost. And let's see if we get the theme, which we do. So now we're running the theme on localhost. We have all the images, all the CSS, all the animations are properly showing up. That's because we imported the static assets initially. Probably should have done that second, but either way. So this whole thing is now properly integrated in terms of the template, the home template, and the static assets. Let's go ahead and throw this up on the staging server just to make sure it works on staging as well. This way we can be confident that everything we're doing locally is accurately reflected on the staging server, because obviously that's where it really matters. Okay, let's go ahead and check the staging URL and let's see what we get over there. Same thing. Okay, so everything is properly reflected on the staging server as well as localhost. as we see on localhost. So now we're really in business. Now we can actually go ahead and start reconfiguring this theme for our site, our coffee shop. So let's get into it. So let's see here. Where should we begin? So in the main.js route, we are rendering the home template, which is really just spitting out this HTML, and then that's it, right? So let's begin by taking this title tag and the head tag, and let's change that to Joe's Coffee House. And let's see that show up properly on localhost. Okay, so on localhost, we now have Joe's Coffee House, right? And then that means we should change it over here as well. So let's go ahead and make that change. I'm going to leave the server running this time because it is watching for changes. So we can do Joe's Coffee House, and then here, and then if we go to the bottom, you'll see on the footer there's one more instance of QC now. So we can go to the bottom where there's the footer, and then we should find this right here and change that to Joe's Coffee House. And then let's make sure that that shows up properly, which it does. Great. So this is good to go. So now what we want to do is take advantage of the actual templating engine to render this data, because maybe Joe's Coffee House, he changes it to Joe's House of Coffee one day, and you don't want to have to change it in 10 different locations. So what we want to do is we want to create a data object, and we want to actually insert the data here. And then we can pass that data object into the template rendering engine, and then Mustache will do the rest. Keep in mind we gave the key value, the key here is title, and the value is Joe's Coffee House. So what we want to do now is head back to our template, and then we want to use the Mustache templating engine syntax to render that value instead. So it's going to be title here in double curly braces, and that's the Mustache syntax. And then don't forget to do it over in the other spots as well. So we want to take advantage of the templating engine as much as we can. This makes life a lot easier and a lot faster for changes down the road. So, so now we can reload and we'll see the same thing, Joe's Coffee House, so forth and so on. But like I was saying, maybe Joe wants to change his name to Joe's House of Coffee one day. So we can just change it right here in one spot like that, and then it should update in all the locations. So Joe's House of Coffee in all 3 spots. So really we want to take advantage of this as much as we can. Whoops, that shouldn't be there. Okay, so that's good to go. So let's go ahead and keep on making some changes for Joe's Coffee House instead of all this basic configuration, imagery, and content from the theme itself. So let's say right here, let's change that to a key called description in here in the data. So description, welcome to my house of coffee. Let's go with R. We hope you enjoy our broad selection of premium coffee from all over the world. Okay, so now we have another key called description. So if we want to change this to the description key, we just go to the bottom where all that stuff is, and using the same templating engine syntax, the Mustache templating engine syntax, we can just put in description like that, and we should see the new value that we just typed in over here. So that's good to go. Now it may seem like we don't really need to do that in this case because there's only that one spot, but if we go to the top in the head tag, typically there's a meta tag called description. Whoops. Name description. And then value. And then if we reload and check the head tag, you'll see this meta tag right here and with the value that we have for description. This is really good for like basic SEO stuff. It's not really that important, but if you are doing this kind of development for clients, they're going to ask for stuff like this. Okay, cool. So that's good to go. Let's start carving up our template, our home template, into what's called partials. So let me explain what that is. If we look at this over here, you'll see certain components of this page that are generic to the entire website. So here's what I mean by that. Like this website header, this navigation header, excuse me, right here is something that would show up on every page of the site. So if we have a blog page, which hopefully we'll have soon, as well as a menu page, this nav header will show up on all those pages. The same can be said for the footer right here. This should show up on every page on the site. Also, a couple of the non-visual components, like the head tag, should show up on every page of the site. Should be in every page of the site, as well as these JavaScript imports on the bottom of the page. So rather than copying and pasting those over into every single page, which is it's really not really, it's kind of a sloppy practice, we want to use what's called partials, which are files that we can insert in every page, which represent entire chunks of HTML. It'll make more sense when we actually do it. So here in the views directory, I'm going to create a new directory, a subdirectory in the views directory called partials. And inside the partials directory, I'm going to create a new file called nav.mustache. And it's important to understand that these are just mustache template files. So if I go to the top of the home mustache template, the home, and if you scroll down a bit, you'll see there's a nav HTML tag, which is the nav bar. So if I highlight and copy this whole thing, if I actually just cut it entirely, I just removed it, right? So if I reload the page, you'll see that the nav bar is now gone, right? Because that makes sense because I removed it. So if I paste that into the mustache file, the nav.partial file, excuse me, nav.mustache partial file, I've created a partial where I can insert this chunk of HTML pretty much wherever I want to by using this double curly brace syntax again, but this time you want to add a little caret right there and then the name of the partial. So this is called nav because that's the file name right here. So if I reload the page now, the navigation bar has been restored. But the important thing to recognize here is that we are using a partial. So this one line of code right here, line 32, actually represents all of this right here, all 16, 17 lines right here. So the nice thing is when we create more pages and add more functionality to the site, we can just insert this template using this nav partial rather than writing all 17 lines of code. So we really want to take advantage of that. It's an important thing. It's an important concept. This really cuts down on repetitiveness of coding. So in the partial, I'm going to create another one called footer. And this partial will be responsible for the footer section on the bottom of pages. So let's head back to the home.mustache. The footer is on the bottom. You'll see it right here. It's actually called a footer tag. So if we scroll to the bottom, right here where it closes, we can just grab that and just cut it. And then in the footer partial file, just paste that guy in. So make sure it looks like this. And then I'm going to reload. And you'll see that the footer is now gone, right? We removed it. But now let's restore it using the partial. So if we go back to our home mustache, we can just do that. I'm going to put this loader in the footer as well. It's all the way on the bottom. Okay, so now if I reload, there it is. So even better. So now you may recall I mentioned we should do the same thing with these JavaScript imports. So I'm going to call these scripts. So this will be scripts dot mustache. And let's go back to our home template. Let's grab these guys. And then this time I'm going to just go ahead and do the import right away. And then inside these scripts, partial, just paste that guy in. And then the last one I'm going to do is the head tag partial. And if we go to the top, I'm going to grab the internal components of the head tag and replace that with head. The reason I'm not grabbing the entire tag is because sometimes for individual pages I make small tweaks within the head tag, so I can just add those over here if I wanted to. So inside the head tag we can just do that, and that's going to give us our head partial. So now if I reload the page, basically you're not going to see anything different visually, at least you shouldn't. It should be the same. That's kind of the idea here. But our code is much more navigable on the home template file, the home mustache file. And anything that's left behind, any content that's left behind, theoretically should be specific to the home page. So all the code you're seeing here should basically be code that it's supposed to only be on the home page, or at least, or better yet, not on every single page. That's probably the best way to put it. So that's the idea behind using partials. It's just better organization. So I'm going to do a quick deploy. This time I will pause the video so that you don't have to watch it deploy. So let's Control C. I'm going to pause the video and do a quick deploy, just to make sure we confirm that everything works on the staging environment as it does on local. So go ahead and send this guy up to the staging environment. And while that's going, I'm just going to pause the video. Alrighty, the deployment is now done. Let's go ahead and copy and paste the staging URL into the tab. And we just want to confirm that we didn't make any major changes to the UI, or really any changes to the UI, other than it now says Joe's Coffee Shop. So once again, we're confirming that everything on the staging URL looks the same as it does on local. This is a good practice to get into, to do a lot of sort of frequent deploys, because sometimes, well, not really very often, it's pretty seldom, but occasionally something won't work quite right on the staging environment as it does on local, and you want to, obviously the staging environment is really where the rubber meets the road. You want to make sure everything is working on a live hosting environment. So okay, so we're good to go. So let's see, let's start focusing on, I'm going to add one more page, so just so you can see how these partials really help us out in terms of making life a lot easier in terms of code, reusability, and organization. So let's go ahead and add a blog page. And if you open up the Kusina theme, you'll see that there is a blog page already. So let's open this up in the Visual Studio Editor, copy all the HTML and dump it into our blog mustache template. But this time, let's go ahead and replace the imports with our partials right away. And that will make life a lot easier when we want to make changes down the road. Okay, let's grab the head tag. And let's get rid of this nav tag and use the partial for that. Okay, so now we have a new template for the blog. However, we don't have a route set up for it. So let's go ahead and go back to our main.js route, and let's create another handler, a get handler, for the blog template, and then pass in argument, and then let's do res.render, and then blog. Now don't forget, we got to pass in this data. Otherwise, it won't have the data arguments inside the templating engine itself. And then let's go ahead and pass that in. And let's do a quick npm run serve. Now I have a feeling something is not going to import properly, but I think I know why, so it should be an easy fix. Oh, nope, I was wrong. Oh no, that's the home page. Let's go ahead and check out the blog page. Okay, so here's the blog page. Actually, it imported fine, so everything looks good here. And don't worry about this header, this black text header. That's because of this right here. Yeah, we'll have to take care of that in a minute. But otherwise, the import is good. So let's go back to our home page. And if you click on blog right here, it won't work because it's going to a blog.html. So what we want to do is head over to our nav partial right here, and you see where it says blog HTML. We want to get rid of that and do /blog. Now, notice how we only have to do that on one page, on one file, right here, and then it'll properly go, but this will properly be configured as well. So here's where the partial really helps us out, because we just have to make one change to one file and it propagated to all the other pages. In this case, there's only 2. Great, so that's good to go. Let's head back to the main.js route. Now, you may notice that we're using the same exact data object here and here on these 2 routes, and that's considered poor form. This is duplicate code. It's exactly the same in both cases. So that's no good. What we basically have here is a global configuration JSON data, basically a subset of data that's pertinent to the entire website. So it's a global configuration object essentially. So what we can do is create a single JSON file that will propagate to these two routes, as well as any other route that we add down the road. Essentially a global configuration. But luckily, the Turbo hosting environment gives us basically that option out of the box. So what we can do is create that. Well, let's just do it and you'll see how it works. So let's turn off the server. So what we want to do is create a new directory here at the top level called pages. It's the wrong spot. At the root level called pages. Inside the pages directory is where we can store JSON configuration for all the pages. That's why it's called pages. So here we want to create a global, this time a JSON object, global JSON. And inside the main.js route, we can just grab the JSON here and just paste it in here. Now, you're getting warnings here because in valid JSON form, the keys and values have to be strings, double quotation mark strings like that. So just be aware that otherwise it's not considered valid JSON. Now this is a global JSON object that's passed into our routes by the Turbo hosting environment, basically out of the box. It just gives it to you for free. So the way you grab it is, instead of creating our own data object, we can grab what's called the context from the request. And this context object right here will contain this global JSON object over here. And it will just give us the keys and values for free. So let's go ahead and confirm that. If we go to our, let's see the best spot, the nav.mustache. So instead of title here, we have to reference the global object. So we do global.title. So it gets passed into our request context underneath the global key. So if I go back to the nav mustache, we now have to do global.title. So let's go ahead and run the local server. And if I head back to the home page, you'll see that Joe's House of Coffee shows up properly here, but we lost it over here and down here on the footer because those partials are still referencing the actual normal keys. So what we need to do is head back to the other partials. So we had footer, and we have, instead of title, we're going to want global, and then the description as well, global. And then head over to the head tag, and then same thing. We have a title and a description, and that should be it. So let's go ahead and try that on local. And reload. Now we have Joe's House of Coffee everywhere we had it before, and the description, don't forget that. And that's much cleaner code because if you look at the route now, we just have one data object called the context being passed in. We could even just pass in the context directly if you want to. There's no reason why you couldn't do it like this. And now we're back down to a very stripped down, sort of bare bones route, and the data itself is right here in this global JSON file. It's a much cleaner separation of your code. That's what we call separation of concerns. We want to keep things as sort of isolated as possible so that whenever we make a change, we don't have to change it in 50 different locations. We can just change it in one, and then it propagates everywhere else. So once again, let's make sure that this works on the staging environment. So the way you configure your pages, so we added a pages directory with a global JSON configuration object. The way you have to update your remote hosting environment to be aware of that change. And the way you do that is you turn off your server and you do turbo page and then the name of the configuration object. You don't need the JSON extension. And this will basically, great. Now what's happening here is that it's just taking your contents from here and just putting it on the remote context. So you're basically just syncing up your context from here to the remote. So now what you can do is you can do turbo deploy again and make sure it works on the remote. So I'm going to go ahead and do another deploy, and I'll pause the video so you don't have to sit through this. Okay, the deployment is now up. So let's go ahead and check that out on the staging environment and make sure everything is still the same. Okay, looks good. Everything looks the same. We do have a new page for the blog. Let's go ahead and check that out. Looks good here. And let's go back to the home page. Whoops, we want to do home. So we just found a bug on the nav partial, by the way. So we want to fix that in a moment. But let's check out the home page. Now let's say Joe's House of Coffee. Let's say Joe wants to change it back to Joe's Coffee House. So this is a very common thing if you're working with clients or if you're just working with other people. They're oftentimes very indecisive. They're going to want to change back and forth. And the idea is you don't want that to be a big deal. You want that to be a quick sort of 1, 2, 3 type of thing. So if we want to change this back to Joe's Coffee House, instead of making a million changes in the code and redeploying and all that stuff, we can just take the global JSON and just do Joe's Coffee House like that. And then all you gotta do is turbo page global. And that should take care of it on the remote as well, because this does sync up our context from local to remote. And that makes life a lot easier in terms of making very small changes like that. So so again, remember when you're doing this global command, you're just syncing up the remote context with your local context. And so you can make very small, quick changes like that propagate quickly, pretty much instantly, on the live environment, which is very convenient. So you don't have to do a million things to make a small change like that. Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap it up here for this first video. Got through a lot in this video. I moved a little bit fast, so like I said, if you're totally new to Node and Express, or even just programming in general, a lot of this is going to be a bit too soon. If you've never done any Node Express before, head over to Turbo 360 and check out the tutorials page and check out this one right here, Basic Node, JS, and Express. And this is the tutorial where I cover the real mechanics and the minutia behind everything I'm doing. I explain every single step. Like for example, what are these rec, res, next things, and how do I get the what does this context mean, and all that stuff, and how do I what does all this mean? Like line by line, I explain what all this stuff means. In this video, in this sort of sequence, I'm assuming you understand the basics of Node Express, Node.js and Express, and sort of putting together things in a more higher level. In just a more realistic situation. So hopefully that makes sense. In the next video, we're going to start working on the actual page content. So the actual contents for the home page, replacing all this stuff with coffee imagery, copy just for the Joe's Coffee House, the header and the text, all this good stuff. And then, and yeah, that's it. So hopefully that makes sense. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.